So I want to welcome you. This is our first meeting about the opportunity zones and the forum. We did get, I think, projected regulations finally last week from the feds. They've been promising us for months, so we're going to move forward with this afternoon. I'm happy to see all of you here. We are just kind of kicking off a little bit. We're going to start with an overview of the program at the federal level. Then we'll go into how the state handled the program and what we've done to date on that. And then after our break, we will have a resource panel of people who are involved in the funds, and they've already initiated some activities within the Opportunity Zone in some communities. So I'm going to introduce Cory Maxwell from Fulton-Ellie, and he will get us started with an overview from the federal level. Oh, one announcement before we go. Come on up. We will be filming this today, so the forum, and we will post it to our website. So for the communities that you maybe didn't bring the whole team or such, you will be able to access the information on our website. So, thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and Department of Commerce. I'm Cory Maxwell. I'm a shareholder with the Fulton-Ellie firm, and I'm very happy to be here today in front of Kansas's economic developers to talk about opportunity zones. I know I've worked with a lot of the folks in this room, and the work with the folks in this room is really what has brought us and our firm so heavy into the OZ space. So my career has been as a real estate and economic development attorney. I've worked in all of the various Kansas incentive programs, the Missouri incentive programs, and all of the sort of Midwestern states. And as most in this room likely know, we as Kansas, and for those of us in Kansas City that are right on that state line, we have some of the strongest economic development tools in the nation. And so from that, I've really spent the 15 years of my career figuring out how do you take those incentivized dollars and put them into a real estate or project capital stack. And so from that, it was very natural that when we were looking at tax reform, and I was reading through tax reform last Christmas and sort of avoiding my mother-in-law and sitting over and going through the bill, and I was actually looking at it for the reason of Kansas incentives. I was trying to understand that if we bonded a deal and did TIFs or did STAR bonds or did CIDs or any of the other tools that a lot of us use, how that was going to affect income tax, and there were some changes in the bill that affected those types of things on lots of projects we've worked on in the various communities. I ran into this concept, opportunity zones, and it was new to me, but I got immediately excited about it, and our firm set off on a very, very strong course to try to lead the nation on OZs. I started blindly cold calling Washington, D.C. I started checking in with our representatives. I found the EIG group, the Economic Innovation Group. We went on their sort of circle, inner circle. We got on the Novogradac Working Group, and we started pounding away on opportunity zones all the way back in January. And since that time, we formed an opportunity zone practice group. I have 20 attorneys all across the country that are cross-disciplinary in tax, real estate, corporate, fund formation, wealth planning, and public policy, that we're taking all of these various areas from all of our 18 different offices and spending all of this time on opportunity zones because we believe it will be that big of a deal. This is a national tool. The amount of capital that is going to flow in is going to be stunning, and the projects that this is going to make work is going to be stunning. And we're already seeing green shoots of that from the deals we have already closed, the funds we have already created, and started working on this. But before we get to all of that, let me start at the foundational basis. A lot of these things have been stolen from Economic Innovation Group. I've given them proper credit, though, and everybody who sort of has read anything about opportunity zones, you'll ultimately end up at EIG. And so first and foremost, before we get down into the deal making, let's go to the politics and the policy sort of behind this. Why did Opportunity Zones pass Congress, and where did this come from? And you don't have to do deep sort of research or scholarship to look at the New York Times, to look at the Wall Street Journal, and to read articles about the uneven recovery that has happened since the Great Recession. It's in there all the time about sort of the various paths that have happened, but EIG has really broken this down and showed that 52 million Americans live in economically distressed census tracts. And the difference that you're seeing between prosperous census tracts and economically impoverished census tracts is sort of stark, right? What you're seeing here is the blue lines. Blue lines are the prosperous census tracts across America, and you'll basically see all of the job growth that has happened since 2000 have happened in these prosperous census tracts. And all of the business establishments that have happened in America have essentially happened in these census tracts, right? And honestly, all of the rest of the sort of quintiles are sort of staying flat. And even more, if you're in the impoverished areas, you're moving down from that. So, out of that became as one small tool in the toolbox of how we try to change the course of this economic recovery was Opportunity Zones. And even though there was not a single Democratic vote for tax reform, the one piece of tax reform that is broadly bipartisan is Opportunity Zones. And I bring that up all the time not to get into the middle of a political debate between right or left. I bring that up when I'm traveling the country to talk to real estate developers and entrepreneurs and family offices for the point to say, this is a law you can invest in. This is something you can count on. Because even if we're a few weeks away from a big blue wave that strikes, or Trump has a repudiation and is thrown out of office in 20, right? I do not believe that you're going to see a difference in policy when it comes to Opportunity Zones. When we're talking about moving more capital into these economically depressed zones since likely the Great Society, I do not think that will end up being a program that the left is going to walk away from. So I bring that up again, not for the politics, but just to start the component that we have broad bipartisanship. We've got Cory Booker and Tim Scott that are pressing forward on this and have been the anchors of it. And then you have the administration sort of deeply behind it, and we can talk through that as we go into what happened with the regs and otherwise in questions. But, okay, what's the idea? That was the politics. What's the idea? The idea is that there are $6 trillion of unrealized capitalized gains in the American economy. And if those gains are unrealized, then the government's not making any money off them. So what are we trying to do? We are trying to spur the market to transact. We're trying to give the market a reason to sell that highly appreciated stock. That family business that has been owned for generations and the baby boomer is ready to retire, we're giving them a way to transact. And with that, we're telling them, don't just put the money in your pocket, right? Instead, put that money into a fund and then move that money from the fund down into a business or deal in an Opportunity Zone. So that's the policy, that's the idea behind it. So then what are the benefits playing off of that? You sold, and I always do these numbers, and we can play with different numbers depending what area we're in, but I always just do these because it makes the math super easy. So you had a $10 million capital gain. You sold $10 million of Amazon stock. You were in early, and you've now had a $10 million capital gain. No ifs, ands, or buts. You're going to pay 23.8% to the federal government. And I said Amazon stock, but to be clear, it could be any type of capital gain. It could be a real estate deal. It could be a hard asset. It could be real estate. Now, at least there we have to talk about the differences in 1031 and OZs. But if it was stock, if it was Bitcoin, if it was classic cars, if it was art, any of those things that you've created a capital gain, you're going to pay 23.8% to the federal government. So before you even get started on a new investment, $2.38 million is gone, right? And then depending on what state you're in, you also have the state tax benefits as well. Speaking to an audience, my home state, fellow Kansans, right? We conform to federal tax law. So for all of our Kansan investors, we conform to that and the benefits are more. Our capital gains rate, 4.5%, 5%, right? Put that on top of it and you can avoid paying that $2.88 million of tax, because if your investor instead, or this high net worth individual, moves the money, takes that $10 million, puts it in a fund, and gets it down into a zone, they can defer paying tax for now 8.25 years, right? They can defer, they can get a long-term deferral on the payment of that tax. So they do not have to pay tax till 12/31/2026. So they can earn a return on their money. So the first benefit is a long-term deferral. The second benefit is partial forgiveness of the gain. What do I mean by this? $10 million that I was making in that example, that's $10 million of profit. And because it's profit, it by definition has no basis. The basis is zero, right? So instead, we've put it down in the fund, we've got it down in the deal, right? If you're in the fund for 5 years, you get a 10% step up in basis. If you're in the fund for 7 years, you get an additional 5% step up in basis. By the way, those deadlines, that has to be before the investment period ends. And the investment period is 2026. So at 5 years, I get $1 million basis. At 7 years, I get a $500,000 additional basis. So I now have $1.5 million of basis. So when I pay tax, and I pay tax on 12/31/2026, I only pay tax on $8.5 million. And if you do the math, then on my example of that $10 million bucks, you pay basically, if we're just talking about the federal rate, you pay $2 million. So you've had a $380,000 savings. So I was able for 8 years to earn a return on my money. I have a $380,000 savings as well when I pay tax on 12/31/2026. And by the way, I'm doing this simple example and saying that you pay on that sort of 85%. There's some tricks to that we can get in later as we think through this. But those are the two first benefits, the deferral and the partial forgiveness. And those are interesting, those are intriguing, and those are exciting. But honestly, the lawyers in the room and the accountants in the room, we would be talking to folks about that when they did their taxes if that's all there was. There wouldn't be an audience of 100 here to learn more about this, and you wouldn't be hearing about it in your communities, and you wouldn't want to know more to figure out how to apply it, but for the third. Because the third benefit is where the action is, and the third is why the sort of market is fomenting and excited about this. And the third is that if you're in the deal for 10 years and a day, and you exit, you pay no tax on the exit. Nothing. So that $10 million investment we made, we paid tax at 12/31/2026, but then we sold it. Let's say we invested this year. We sold it in 29, so we were there for 10 years. And we sold it for $20 million, $50 million, $100 million. You pay no tax on the exit. So this is why the world is excited. This is why the world is focused on OZs, is that sort of component there. So I did it a little bit through the example, but I'm going to go through a quick sample investment. So January 2nd, 2018, our taxpayer has an event, right? Has a $1 million capital gain. And let's say this was Cord Maxwell in his individual capacity. Cord Maxwell does not have $1 million capital gains, just to be very clear, but his individual capacity, he then has to get down into a deal in 180 days. or sorry, not get down into the deal, he has to get into the fund in 180 days. So we have to create a qualified opportunity fund, and I have to be into that fund within 180 days. So
180 days from the sale, right?
180 days from the sale. Now, the guidance that came out last Friday, which we've got a whole team analyzing, has actually improved that substantially for pass-through entities, and we can talk about that. But for this example where we had a sole sort of, an individual person at the event, they have to get into a fund in 180 days, okay? So then they get from that fund down into the deal, and we can talk about that as well as we go through it. But for this purposes, they've got down into the deal. They have 0 basis. That was all profit. We hit 5 years. They get a step up in basis of 10%. They now have a $100,000 basis. We hit 7 years. They get an extra $50,000 of basis. They pay tax on December 31st, 2026. They pay on $850,000 in tax at the federal rate. Let's assume it's still 23.8%. So they pay $20,000 or $200,000 at that time. And then they're able to exit then in 28 at $2 million bucks. They pay no tax. So that's the investment. So then everybody asks from that part, what's a fund? How does a fund work? How do I do this? So there's only 3 tests for a fund. There's the entity test. You have to be a corporation or a partnership. We always thought so and believed and knew that it was going to be limited liability companies as well. The code never talks about limited liability companies. It talks about corporations and partnerships. We learned for sure out of the government on Friday that limited liability companies are allowed. So from an entity, you have to be a domestic corporation or partnership. The purpose must be to invest in opportunity zones, okay? I'd love to tell you that this is magic and this is really hard and you have to hire us to be able to do this component of it, but we add about 25 words to your regular LLC documents or corporate documents or partnership documents. There's not much here in the purpose test. The world then sort of gets interesting when you get to the asset test. I'm sure this is what many in the room have heard. And the asset test is that you have to have 90% stock or partnership interest in a qualified opportunity zone business, or be in qualified opportunity zone business property. And we can walk through those in sort of more detail. The other thing that we learned, and this was early, this wasn't Friday, this was back in April, and this was a big debate at the very beginning of this law. The things we got done in sort of the spring, where we got the zones created in every state across the union, and then we got this component of self-certification. This was huge. This was a massive step by the administration. And the massive step was there is not going to be one Kansas fund, or I'm picking communities, one Lawrence fund or one Dodge City fund. There won't be a certain set number of funds. Instead, we're going to self-certify. Taxpayers are going to be able to create as many funds as they want out there. This will be almost no different than I go and create for clients every day. Corporations, LLCs, and partnerships at the Secretary of State's office, right? I fax something in and I've got it back immediately. We're going to have that many funds that are created out there in the world. This was a really, really big component and a huge debate at the beginning of this law, and the administration went to open this up and get it as big as they could. Now, I talked about sort of that asset test and how you could invest, and this is a sort of diagram to show it. You have your fund up top. Your fund can then come and invest in partnership interest and stock of QOZBs, Qualified Opportunity Zone businesses, and those Qualified Opportunity Zone businesses then go invest in business property, or you can invest direct from the fund straight into business property. Now, tax lawyers and tax credit lawyers, and I've been to tons of these conferences and spoke at tons of these conferences, will sort of geek out at this point and start talking to you about direct investments versus indirect investments and what the statute says with one of them and doesn't with the other and how there's going to be more flexibility. I'm going to try to stay above that. If you ask me questions, I might have to sort of drag down into that. But I'm going to try to stay above this, and I use this chart for one really simple reason when I'm talking to economic developers and folks like this. And the point is, even though I'm a real estate lawyer and a real estate development lawyer and do real estate development deals all day long, the intent of this law was not just to do real estate deals, right? Real estate deals are great. We want to do property deals. We want to change the built environment. There's tons of folks in this room that measure success by changing the built environment of their city or county, right? But the focus of this law, they knew we were going to benefit as real estate folks. The focus of this law was the, quote, real economy, right? Was putting people to work, was growing jobs, was growing employment, was growing the tax base out there, and doing that through being able to invest in business. And I use this chart to instead sort of show that point, that this isn't just about real estate development deals. Now, doing deals that aren't real estate deals is hard. That is not easy, right? We went through this sort of all with new markets back in the day. I don't know if anybody here has done a new markets deal in their community, but they're painful, they're brutal, they're really, really, really hard to do. And when you look at it after sort of 18 years of history that we've had from new markets, we've like not done a single business deal, right? An operating company deal. We've only done real estate deals. And why is that? And why is it hard? Because when you have a place-made incentive, an incentive that is about an area, an incentive that's about a census tract, there's two practical things that always keep coming up. One, businesses can get up and move. Two, where's that business located, right? A real estate deal, you know exactly where it's located. Something that's on the internet, a plumber that goes all around town, right? How do you know where a business is located? And how do you trace where a business is located? And so it's really hard to do business deals. That being said, the folks that are behind this law, the folks that push this and got this done, they want this to work for business, and they've pressed on it. And probably the single biggest thing we've sort of been doing as the EIG Coalition, and as we've been talking to the Hill and talking to the administration, is trying to press to make this work for business. And not to get too far down into the details, but we had a huge win last Friday. Sort of everything that came out of last Friday was a huge win. All of the guidance we got was pro-taxpayer, pro-investor, pro-opportunity zone, pro-developer, pro-business, right? The administration wants to make this program as big as they can, and IRS and Treasury are going along with it. But probably no bigger component was, what's the substantially all test? If you go through what's qualified opportunity zone business and what's qualified opportunity zone business property, you'll see again and again and again the word substantially all, substantially all, substantially all. And the question is, what does substantially all mean? And for one single thing, what is the tangible sort of property? We've answered that question of what substantially all means, and we've set a 70% threshold. And this was huge. This was really big, because having that 70% threshold is what we believe sort of gives us the fudge factor, or the room to be able to do business deals and ultimately write legal opinions that allow business deals to move forward. So I've jumped around a little bit, and again, I said I didn't want to get down in the weeds and take this down into the weeds to exactly what QOZB is and QOZBP. I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll give sort of quick issues and things to consider when we look at this for the folks in the room. First, you got to be new property. New property means property that's acquired by the fund in the 2018 tax year or going forward. This cannot be old deals, old property out there, okay? And importantly, to be new, it also has to be sold to you from an unrelated party. Okay, so one of the number one questions I get all the time is I start walking people through this. They're super excited. This is real estate folks. They're super excited. They say, this is fantastic. You just showed me and told me that I'm in one of these zones. What does it mean, Court? What's the answer to that? And the answer is really simple, that their property is now worth its real estate fundamentals plus X. I don't know what X is. The market hasn't answered to us yet what X is, but X is more value, right? It's worth something more. Now, the interesting piece about that and the way this law works is the person that owns it currently today, they can't take advantage of it. They can take advantage of it by selling it out there. They can move it on to some other sort of developer or other person, but it has to be an unrelated party. So lots of developers and lots of folks say, okay, how do I work? How do I do that? How do I figure that out, right? And the answer is we have a fund that comes in and purchases that property and they can own 19.9%. They're then an unrelated party. Now, this actually works given the promote structures of real estate development deals. It works fine. There's some people that don't want to get diluted. If they don't want to get diluted, then we have to start looking at, can I do ground leases or other types of lease arrangements? I don't have any guidance on those, but that could be one answer. But generally, we have to be new property into it. I have to have active conduct of a business. I cannot just, I thought when this first occurred, okay, I'm going to go buy CVS's and Walgreens in impoverished census tracts across America. That doesn't work. Triple net leased Walgreens and triple net leased Walgreens and CVS's doesn't work. That's not an active business. You got to have an active business, an active trader business out there. You can't have more than 5% non-qualified financial property. You can't go do a bank deal that's an OZ. You can't go set up a shop that then the only thing they do is trade federal treasuries, right? That doesn't work. You can't have any of the sin businesses in there. And the sin business list is fairly funny. What's in there: golf courses, country clubs, massage parlors, retail packaged liquor stores. This doesn't apply to Kansas. This isn't an endorsement of this in any way. But one of the most interesting questions you get when you're in California speaking on this, Colorado speaking on this, and others is marijuana a sin business. Under the direct terms of the statute, marijuana is not a sin business. Frankly, this may be something we're dealing with on the Missouri side of the state line as quickly as next year. Now, maybe they're going to change that in regs, but because this was the same sort of thing that was used in 2000 when we did new markets, they used sort of the same concepts that came from there, and nobody ever even thought about the sort of proliferation that was going to happen through that. And then the biggest test, and where most of the action is around, is the component of original use or substantial rehab. And importantly, that's an OR test. Original use or substantial improvement. So I'll talk about original use first. And original use is an interesting concept for everybody in this room and for your real estate development community, but that the original use starts with or commences with the opportunity zone business. One of the ways we're playing this and working on this is could opportunity zones end up becoming a permanent finance vehicle? So you have an apartment complex that's being built in your community. You have an office building that's being built in your community. You have a retail shopping center that's being built in your community, and it is inside of an opportunity zone. And it's under construction today. It started before all of this happened. And this is occurring daily right now that we're working on this problem. But it hasn't gotten its TCO, or it hasn't gotten its C of O. Can someone come in with an opportunity fund and purchase that asset before the C of O is granted? We think they can. And if they do that, they have that op fund business that came in and did that has a good deal. Done. Over. That minute. Now, it makes my head sort of explode as a real estate attorney trying to think about that you're gonna go and buy a property before you've got a C of O, before the lien waivers are there, how you get clean title, how you get a bank to finance that. But there's people all over the country working on that exact item of figuring out how to do it. Unfortunately, we didn't get guidance on this point in this first regulatory package that came out. So people are in this really sort of awkward time right now. But we believe that works for original use. But the bigger component is substantial improvement, and this is probably what many have heard about. So what's the substantial improvement test? The substantial improvement test is that you double the adjusted basis within a 30-month period. So I'll give the example I used to use on Thursday and before for the last 10 months. So you come in and you buy a piece of property for $1 million. You have to spend $1,001,001 within 30 months. That's substantial improvement. So where we were sort of tracking to this was heavy, ground up construction or really, really heavy value add. Significant value add. Here's what we learned on Friday. Land doesn't count in that equation. So if you go through that same analysis that I bought a building and I bought a building that's on a piece of dirt for $1 million, and I attribute $200,000 to the land and $800,000 to the building. Now I only have to spend $800,001 to have substantial improvement. Now it gets even better than that. And this piece wasn't in guidance, but this is something we're talking to clients with every day. Is how do you take the big two components of the tax law and use them together? How do you use OZs and how do you use 100% expensing? Well, could I then instead, in my example, go and have a $1 million building that I purchase, I put $200,000 to the land, I have $800,000 to the building. I then cost seg the building, do a cost segregation study, take out 20% is below 20-year property, 100% expense that immediately, so I can pull $160,000 out of the equation. Now, I only have to do a $640,001 improvement to the building. And so as we pile all of these things on top of each other, what it means, sort of the practice point and the takeaway is, the world of places where we can use OZs is growing and growing all the time.
So what if can you give an example of if you just have bare ground? In that example, what does that look like?
So the bare ground example is the hardest example. And we gave a webinar yesterday morning going through sort of all of these examples. But the answer is you exclude the land, that the land doesn't even count. So to take it to its sort of logical conclusion, we've come up with the lemonade stand problem, right? Can I go and have $1 million piece of land and put a $100 lemonade stand on it that a kid sells tickets for a lemonade stand? Technically, under the regs that were just put out, the lemonade stand works. Now, I would not recommend that for anybody in this room or to encourage your developers or folks in your community to go create lemonade stands, right? We think ultimately the rule is going to get amended and changed and not allow that. But if you read what the guidance said, the lemonade stand sort of works. And basically you just fully ignore that land and then you start from that point. So you're substantially improving at $1. The second that we start building anything, you've gone and improved it there. And so there's all kinds of ideas. Is this just going to lead to land speculation and others? And I think that's one of the things the Treasurer is looking for guidance on.
Okay, one more question on that.
Yep,
Let's say I have a building, I tear down the building, and then I build it. How does that work?
Yeah, if you tore that down, I think you're going to be back to a zero basis in here and be able to start from the beginning.
So they don't count the original value of the building in any of the formula?
I can't exactly answer it. I guess the big part is, if you're already going to start building, you're going to make that. right? If you're gonna do ground up construction, we're not gonna have a problem with the substantial improvement component out there, you wouldn't imagine, but where that test sort of resets and where that is, not entirely, certainly not. Okay, so this was the part I told you guys, I started working on this back on Christmas. We were on it in January. I saw this chart in maybe February of last year. And I take this chart wherever I go. I stole this chart from Novogradac, but I place it everywhere so everybody can understand it. Novogradac's a tax credit accountant that's been sort of at the front of this and working on this all across the country. I spoke at their conference down in New Orleans a couple weeks ago. This chart, I'll walk through what it means, but this is the chart at the end of the day that told me where we started, that this is new and novel and we're doing these types of presentations and interest in it, that said in about 6 months from now or a year from now, it's going to be malpractice if anybody is doing a deal in a zone that's not in an OZ structure. You're going to have to. You're going to have to understand your zone as economic developers. Your developers coming into your community are going to have to do it. Everybody's going to have to use this because this is so unbelievably powerful. And what does it say? So what this chart says, and there's tons of numbers on it, but it's looking at a boring investment deal, right? A super steady Eddie single, right? You have a 6% after-tax yield, okay? And if you're outside of a zone, then you've got a 6% after-tax yield, right? Or you're in the zone and you didn't do it in an OZ structure, then you just have a flat line 6. Now, I put you in the legal structure of doing it under an op zone and putting these deferred capital gains in there. What does it look like instead? And what it shows is when you're 4 years into a deal, you have about 150 basis points of additional return. And when you're 5 years into a deal, you have 200 basis points of additional return. And when you're 7 years in, even though you've gotten a step up, you've fallen down a little bit, just the way we calculate IRRs, you're still at about 200 basis points. And when you pay the tax on 12/31/2026, you fall down a little further, but you're still at 170 basis points of additional return. But then you exit at 10 in a day, and you're 300 basis points higher. So you have a 50% increase in yield by the legal structure you use to do a deal. And that's on a boring deal. That's on a 6% deal, right? So you start thinking about it, that 50% increase in yield is true, and that continues on with other sort of items. And for economic developers in the room, or you've heard developers bellyache and tell you that the deal's thin and they can't make it work, or they're not going to do the deal, and it happens all the time, over 10 basis points, 15 basis points, 25 basis points. And I just did 300 basis points by the legal structure. It's incredible, right? We won't be able to do a deal in the zone other than this way. And it gets to sort of my other point that I'm going to bring out at the end of what does this mean, right? And I know everybody here is in economic development, and we work really hard all the time to do these really complicated and tough and hard deals. But we all know sort of a fundamental truth, and our university that's up to the north of us on this in Manhattan has done more research on this than anyone, is what happens to incentive, right? Especially if you have a perfect market like ag. What happens when you put incentive? It goes into ground price. At the end of the day, economic incentives roll into the value of the ground, especially in a perfectly functioning market. Congress changes the sort of incentives for corn by a nickel a bushel. What happens? Corn ground goes up by exactly that much. We've done hundreds of years of study on this to understand it. And so what is going to happen with this program? What's going to happen with this? We're going to see massive asset value inflation in these zones. It's coming. It's happening. I have the chance to work down in, sort of, I take this one as the canary in the coal mine, right? Canary in the coal mine is Scottsdale. Downtown Scottsdale is in an opportunity zone, right? How did that happen? I don't know, but it did, right? And you go down to Scottsdale and you're down in Phoenix and talking about it, the real economy doesn't like exist in Phoenix, right? You have this major metropolitan market, 5 million people, and everybody's just a real estate guy down there, right? All they're trying to do is trade property, trade deals left and right. And what's happening in that downtown Scottsdale zone? Contracts are getting traded, things that haven't even closed on. Asset values are sort of running left and right because their knowledge is advanced on this and further than a lot of other places in the country, and we're seeing those type of deals happen. Now, the interesting thing about this, if you actually step back and think about it, okay, what's going to happen? Asset values are going to inflate. But strangely, if you actually look at what was the policy behind this program, what was the government, what was Congress trying to encourage, wasn't it exactly that? Weren't we trying to spur value increases in these zones? We're actually going to have an unbelievably successful government policy through this. So what kind of deals are going to happen? What are we going to see out there? We're going to see real estate deals. We're going to see new businesses starting to open in these zones. We're going to see expansions. Major expansions of existing businesses and large expansions of businesses that are already in the zones. Now, the first one that is going to happen and is happening right now are real estate deals, right? As I said at the beginning, we're the low-hanging fruit. We're the ones that are going to move first, move fast, and I'm already doing them and have been doing them for months, and more are going to occur. But as we get more of a regulatory framework behind this, and people start to move out on the risk curve, I think we're going to start doing more and more business deals. So that all leads up to something more specific. Those were the slides I take all over the country and talk to developers, business owners, high net worth individuals. But what can I sort of add to this conversation and give all these folks that are on the ground working in these communities? What's my sort of practice points? What should you be doing? This is back to fundamental blocking and tackling, what everybody in this room has been doing for years. Identify your best assets, your best properties, your best pieces of dirt in these zones, and find a way to either get control of them yourself or get them in the hands of your friendly and most trusted developer. The person that has that biggest community interest, that knows what your community is about and is going to deliver on sort of the vision that you want, get it in their hands. Why? Because as we roll through the innings here, asset value inflation is going to happen. All that's going to occur is the land prices are going to go up, and you're going to be stuck in the same situation you've been for years. You've got the dumpy property in the middle of your town that you can't get fixed, right? Figure out a way to get control of that dumpy property before the owner knows about this, fully understands this, the brokers in your town fully understand this, and they reprice the asset. This is just kind of fundamental blocking and tackling, but it's what I believe this room should be focused on, and what I tell the developers in the world to focus on as well. Everybody wants to talk about funds, right? I want to create a fund. I want the community to create one, and otherwise. There's plenty of money. Do not worry about the money. What you got to worry about is having good, solid projects. The projects are what are important. There's only so many good projects to go around in these zones. If you find and have a good project and control that project before asset values inflate, you're going to do fine. You're going to use this along with the other tools in your economic development toolbox to make sustainable change. That's what I would focus this room on. That's what I focus my development clients on day in and day out. Not going and creating funds. Why do you want the headache of a fund? Why do you want to go through and try to underwrite deals? Why do you want to try to figure out securities law and compliance and all of those components that are involved in creating a fund? Everybody starts at, I gotta have a fund, I gotta have a fund. No, you don't. You gotta have qualified opportunity zone business deals. You gotta have projects. Get back to your fundamental and blocking and tackling of what you've done for decades and focus on projects and deals. Don't focus on the fund. I would say the other part here is find those high net worth individuals. High net worth individuals are having events. They're having events, they're creating wealth, and lots of them want to come back and invest local and invest in these good projects. You can run into those, you can find those, you can encourage those to invest local. I would tell you it's shocking the amount of folks that already know about this, are already doing this, that we're creating sort of their parking lot funds. They've had their event. Because of those timelines, I put it in a fund within that 180-day period. They don't know how they're going to distribute that capital yet, and they're looking for projects. If you have those folks in your community, encourage them to create their own fund, and then use that for the good projects that you can find out there. And then I put last was sort of create fund. I think I've kind of given everybody how I feel about that, and they've already sort of let the cat out of the bag on that. But if all of those other things fail, or you've knocked every one of those out of the park and done really, really well with it, then maybe we talk about creating a fund at some point and figuring out how we create a fund. But I would focus on all the other ones before. Sir?
You skipped over the rural point.
Yeah, so I guess the one point I would make is I think I have a very good feel for what's going on in Kansas City, what's going on in Denver, what's going on in St. Louis, Chicago, Dallas. The major markets where we have offices that I'm traveling to and talking with developers, business owners, and high net worth individuals, I can absolutely answer that question that without a doubt, there is more money interested in this program than there are good projects. Where I can't answer is that same thing occurring in rural America? I believe it is, but I don't have the sort of first-hand knowledge for that. And I threw that out because I know our state and how many are in this room, that that's of critical importance. But I believe it is, and I believe also what we're going to see from these zones is there's only so many sort of easy zones. And I'll give an example. Greg Kendall's here with the Wyandotte Economic Development Council. The Rainbow Corridor is in the zone, right? The Rainbow Corridor has poverty in it. It still has substantial poverty. But we've done hundreds of millions of dollars of projects in that zone, and we're going to do $1 billion worth of projects in that zone. The Rainbow Corridor holds the KU Hospital in it, right? You have a 15,000 hospital with 15,000 people coming to work there every day. But the state sort of doubled down and said, we want to see that be bigger, better, and more. That zone is going to explode, and it's going to be phenomenal. But there's only so many projects in those two census tracts, right? No matter how many I try to do, there's only so much dirt and land. And that's going to run out, and we're going to have to go further and further and further to find projects. And they might not be inning one projects. They might be inning 2, 3, or 4. But this is going to get pushed, and it's going to push into those areas. That's my belief, so I think rural is going to be fine. I think rural is going to find projects. I've been on the phone again and again with wind developers that are trying to understand this, geothermal developers that are trying to understand this, solar developers that are trying to understand this, big agricultural operations that want to understand this. So all of those sort of fundamentals that have already existed, I think those are going to continue to flourish and happen in these rural zones. And the interesting part is, going to sort of a question that was answered earlier, now that land's excluded, whoa, did that just open up all different types of ag operations out there? I think it did. So that's the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions now, answer them later on the resource panel. Obviously, everybody in this room knows about these zones. I know that Jordan's going to go through sort of the Kansas process more, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group, walk through, share the knowledge we have of going around the country and talking about this every day. So answer questions now, turn it over. Fire away.
I got one. Surprise. You had a lot of, you were talking about real estate and how the goal of the program is not just to focus on real estate.
Yep.
So I'm wondering, in terms of operating businesses, can investors provide working capital investment to businesses or entrepreneurs to get those businesses going or startups, or how does that fit in? Because it sounded like most of what you're talking about is you buy a building and you convert it for a business, which seems like a real estate transaction.
Yep.
I'm more interested in the entrepreneurial aspects of this.
Yep, absolutely. So you hit it, right? That's what we're looking at, and that was what the law and some of the regulations allowed us to do, was move money out of the fund down into the qualified opportunity zone business to provide them adequate working capital, but they then need to spend that on tangible property, right? And tangible assets out there through this process. But will this work for startup businesses? Yes. So long as we can sort of figure out and make sure that that business traces back to the zone in some form or fashion. So there's things that will be easy. You start a new restaurant. You start a franchise restaurant in one of these areas, right? That works. We know where that business is located. You start some internet venture, where is that located? These are the hardest things when you get into service lines of business. But heavy manufacturing that's sticky and big and large pieces of equipment and they're going to go down right in one of these zones works. You know, restaurants, retail, operations like that work. Service businesses, tougher, harder to figure out how that's going to apply. Sir.
So could you buy and sell assets? I guess I'm asking if the holding period requirement is at the fund level or if it's at the asset level. So what I mean by that is, could you start a company that, say, redevelop single-family houses and buy and sell them, or would you have to hold them for the whole period to take advantage of those benefits?
It's a great question, and the question you just asked is called the interim gains issue. Okay? And it was one of the things we did not get answered in this regulatory package. And it is probably, along with my original use point, what the other places in the statute, what substantially all means, and then the interim gains issue was the single biggest issue in this law. And so what does interim gains issue mean? So I put $1 million in the fund drops that down into a business, I build a piece of real estate or I grow a startup business, right? And I get that bigger and I'm now able to have an exit in year 3 for $3 million. What happens? How does it work? If you talk to Booker and Scott or their legislative staffs, and I've been with them, this is what they'll say. They'll absolutely 100% say the intent of the law is that you have a fund that sits over the business, and that fund is the old Al Gore lockbox, right? Like, the money can come up into the fund, it can grow in the fund, and then it can get redeployed into new deals. And we can keep just rolling and rolling and rolling, and all that matters is the holding period of the fund, okay? If you ask them, that is what they will say. That's what they thought they were passing. That's how they think this law should work, and that's how we want this law to work. The problem is, when you write bills at 3 o'clock in the morning in the Senate Finance Committee, you make mistakes. We've never seen that in Kansas, right? Like at the end of a legislative session, things are happening in the very last minute. Well, that's what happened. And there's a problem. It cites to partnership tax rules. And what that means is, just like, I don't know how many people have invested in real estate or deals here or otherwise, but if you cite to partnership tax rules and you sell an asset, it goes through every level of the LLC, and then you ultimately get a K-1, and it says you made $1 million, or in my example, you made $2 million, right? And it blows the whole tax stream, and it's screwed up. And so the question is, are they going to be able to answer that one through regulation, which I think they feel constrained that they don't have the regulatory ability to do that? And if they don't have the regulatory ability to do that, then we're going to have to run a technical correction bill through Congress and try to get that done through a technical correction that we can end up growing the fund. But the short answer is, I don't have the answer. Nobody has the answer and can answer interim gains yet. But it's like the biggest issue, and this is what Silicon Valley, this is what they're focused on, right? This is what the VC community cares about. This is what they want to do to be able to grow these multi-asset, multi-investor funds that get really large and are able to exit out of targets and keep growing and growing and growing.
You saw about the 90% rule, and you have to actively be using that 90% of the fund. They talk about the penalty and the safe harbor within that. Can you talk a little bit more what they mean by, they talk about, so if it's a $10 million fund, you got to deploy $9 million of that right now. Can you talk about how you get around that so you don't have to start paying a penalty if you don't have a project going?
Yeah. Okay, so first, there's been a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth about this, right? And the first thing I would say is why we talk about funds, and there's going to be these $100 million funds and $500 million funds, right? Given the rules that we have that you can self-certify, you can have as many funds as you want, what's actually going to happen, especially what's going to happen here in Kansas, we're going to do single project funds for single deals, okay? And it's not that hard, especially if it's a real estate deal, right? Especially if it's a real estate deal. Why? Because your equity is 25 to 30 to 40% of the deal, and you got to go buy your land right at the very front of the deal, and your money is down in the deal, and boom, it's over and it's done and it works, right? So from the big perspective, I would say, especially for real estate, it's not that big a deal. And it's not that big a deal when you have single asset funds. But that being said, your question is, how does this work and how do we do it? And exactly what we've been hearing through this process from IRS and Treasury occurred, and it was fantastic news. And it was fantastic news that we've got to get into the fund in that 180-day period. And again, I can talk through at some point if people have partnerships or pass-through entities that you have even more time. But you got to get into the fund, and then you've got your test date that comes, and it depends kind of where you are. And by the way, we're not forming funds right now unless people can immediately get in. We want to wait until January 1st so we don't have a short year and run into this problem. But you sort of get into the fund, and then you go down into the QOZB, the Qualified Opportunity Zone business, and we can have working capital down in that. The statute says you can have adequate working capital. And so what we're doing is dropping money from the fund down into the business and having that adequate working capital and figuring it out how we're going to deploy it. Now, the guidance said we need a couple of things. We need a written plan, a schedule, and we need to conform to that written plan and schedule, right? And that's an interesting component of how that's going to work. It's really easy to do that for individual deals. And this is one of those other points that tell us this is moving more towards individual deals. Big, huge amounts of capital in blind pools, it's going to be really hard, right? So for the most part, what we're seeing is you want to end up having those individual funds that are going to end up going into individual projects. Sir?
To meet the 90% test, in your example where you buy $1 million building and you allocate $200,000 to the land, is that $200,000 still considered an asset that meets the 90% test, or are you going to have to exclude that land when you're measuring the assets in your fund to meet the 90% test?
Yeah, so this is one for my tax guys, by the way. I believe it's excluded from every component of this. So it's definitely excluded from substantial improvement. And then I don't think it harms you either way. It's taken out of the numerator and the denominator in the sort of asset test for the 90% asset test.
Okay.
I'll make sure on that. Great.
There will be time for more Q&A in our second half of the program this afternoon. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Jordan Bickford. I'm the Deputy Chief Counsel at the Kansas Department of Commerce. I want to thank Corp for coming up here and talking over the federal program. Can you hear me? No.
Move the mic closer. I might have to lean a little bit. I'm not quite as up. Is that better? Okay.
So I'm with the Department of Commerce, and I've had the opportunity to work with quite a number of you over the past several months on implementing opportunity zones here in Kansas. I think Corp did a great job going over the federal statute and hopefully addressed a lot of questions that we've been having at Commerce. We're going to have some more opportunity during our second half with our resources panel to get into the weeds a little bit more with the statute and the regulations. Excuse me. But right now I want to talk about how this is working a little bit more locally and the Kansas selection process and what opportunity zones look like here in the state. So a quick timeline of our selection process. The Opportunity Zones program was enacted in December of 2017 through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That statute tasked each governor with designating 25% of our low-income communities across the state as designated opportunity zones, whose areas will be eligible for those investments that will be eligible for benefits under the program. In February of 2018, the Department of Commerce released an announcement requesting letters of interest from our communities to be nominated as our designated opportunity zones. Here in Kansas, we have 770 individual census tracts, and 277 of those were eligible to be designated. So we really wanted to work with our communities to narrow that down to the 25% that we were able to designate. We received letters of interest from 39 different communities, representing 191 different census tracts. In order to narrow that down, the Governor's Economic Growth Subcabinet convened and reviewed all of the submissions. So we did a lot of analysis based on data metrics. We have poverty rate, unemployment rate, the population, other benefits across the state, including rural opportunity zones. And then we really looked at what the communities told us they needed. Communities identified needs as far as infrastructure, workforce housing, food deserts, and a lot of economically depressed downtowns, access to medical care. And then we looked at some of the opportunity, what they've been doing, what recent projects they've done, and what their economic development groups have been doing as far as identifying plans to move forward with economic growth and identifying projects that would address some of those needs as well. Oops. So in March, we reached out to those communities that had submitted letters and let them know that they would all be able to receive at least one opportunity zone designation. We worked with those communities at that point to narrow down which census tracts would actually be designated. Those are based a lot around some anchor institutions of hospitals, different educational facilities, and some of the projects that they identified as well. In April, we submitted our nominations to the U.S. Department of Treasury. And in May, they went ahead and confirmed those. And so we now have our designated opportunity zones in Kansas. We have 74 designated census tracts across the state. They represent 39 communities in 35 counties. They are also spread across all of our 7 business development regions, and we have representatives that work with each of those regions. So as you move forward and want to pursue some projects, we really encourage you to reach out to those representatives and work with them. I believe that a number of them are here, and I'll get to their contact information here in a little bit. But I want to talk to you about the metrics of these areas. This program was greatly designed to fuel investment in economically distressed areas. And across the state, these are based on 2015 census data, but across the state, the poverty rate statewide was 13.6%. In the opportunity zones that we've designated, that rate goes up to 25.93%. The unemployment rate, again, statewide was 5.9%, and in our opportunity zones, that goes up to 8.7%. So we've really focused on these particular data points in identifying need, and that shows what our metrics look like. Additionally, when we reached out to our communities, you guys wrote in and identified that you had projects that you wanted to pursue and economic development plans to address your identified needs. 43 of our designated census tracts stated that they had an identified project that they thought would benefit from Opportunity Zone funding. 61 of these communities say that they have a plan in place, which is great. We also asked you to target some areas of growth that you wanted to focus on. 70 of you indicated that business and industry was an area that you wanted to see a lot more vitalization. In downtown areas, we saw a lot of that, and in expansion and modernization of our industrial parks across the state. There's also some need for tourism, particularly in western Kansas. 57 communities indicated a need for affordable housing for their workforce, as well as for their aging population. So there are projects that people want to focus on to get those more affordable homes and also to put up retirement homes around the country to address our aging population. Another 22 communities indicated that they wanted to focus on different agriculture programs. So while these are kind of broad, people are also working on more specific areas. I mentioned the food deserts earlier, but as we go forward, people have talked about setting up funds and attracting investment to their communities. We get a lot of questions about how people in rural areas are going to attract investment to their projects. So if you look at these numbers here, you're not alone. So we have some resources for you to collaborate and work across communities. And I would encourage you to reach out and see what other folks are doing, because there is potential for regional funding and for industry-based funding. So some of this will be working with your neighbors, and a lot of this will also be thinking creatively. And as you go forward, here are our 7 regions. You can self-identify where you belong. And we have representatives here from the Department of Commerce. The Opportunity Zones program at the state level is going to be an interagency program going forward. We're going to reach out and identify as many resources as possible. However, it is currently housed at the Kansas Department of Commerce, and we are striving to be a good resource for you. So, not to put anybody on the spot, but I'm going to. If you are a regional project manager with the Department of Commerce, would you please stand up? Okay. So some of you may already know these folks, but they are great resources. And we will make their contact information available to you. And I encourage you to reach out to them and talk about this program and how it can work for your community. So, to that end, some of you may have received a survey from us. If you received a survey from the Department of Commerce in the last couple of weeks, can you raise your hand? Excellent. You all have just self-identified as our point of contact for your community. If you did not receive that survey, you are not on our list as a community contact. If you want to be on that list and you want to be directly involved in those conversations that we're having, please see one of us or one of our regional representatives today, or feel free to send me an email and we'll get you on that list. But this is where we're getting our direct feedback from our communities. Most of you are the folks who wrote our letters in the first place, put up your hand and ask for this designation. We look to you to lead this program because this is a market-driven program, but largely it is a local interest-driven program. If you want it to work for you, you're going to have to show up and you're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to identify the projects that Corb was talking about and market yourselves. But mostly you guys have asked not what you can do, but what we can do for you. So the role of the state at this point has been, per statute, to designate these communities. And we wanted to work with the communities because it is going to be your effort that makes this program work. So we reached out to you. And we've designated our census tracts. And now we're done. So, we didn't really choose that path though. We're continuing to reach out to you, and we want to be able to facilitate these community collaborations. I have met with a number of you. I know Monica has met with a number of you. I know that our folks are reaching out to you to say, let's work together. Let's get your stakeholders in the room. Let's talk about how this works. So that is one thing that we are doing. This here is an example of that facilitation. We will continue to do that. Let us know what you want. We're happy to come out and talk with you. We're happy to provide additional resources. And that comes to my next point. We are going to create and distribute resources. Currently, we have a website. It is kansascommerce.gov/opportunity zones. If you're not familiar with that website, that has been our portal for releasing information primarily. We've done some press releases in other places, but this is where our interactive map of opportunity zones is. This is where we released our initial list of communities, our designated zones. This is where our form registration was. We also have some links to federal resources. It links out to the IRS page as we get regulations, as the forms are populated, those will be posted there too. So this is a place where you can go and find some pretty rudimentary resources at this point. Now, as we go forward, we would love to be able to expand this resource. We're working on website development now, but as you go there, we have the ability to link to maps. We have the ability to put up information about the investment projects in your communities. So as you identify projects and as you identify sites that you want investors to be able to access and see, when folks are looking to the state of Kansas and for opportunity zones in the state of Kansas, we can feature your projects and your investment opportunities on this page. So if you're willing to do your end of the work and send it to us, we're willing to get it on our website. Excuse me. Another resource that we have available at this point, we have a LinkedIn group page, and this is really formulated for you to use. It's a platform. You can request to join the group, and you can share your ideas. How I was talking earlier about you guys are not alone, you've got similar interests. Go to this page, talk about what you want to do. Talk about what's working in your community, talk about your questions. And hopefully, we can build a community space there to collaborate and, maybe we generate more questions in the meantime, but it can also be a resource and you can really make it what you want to. So again, you can go to LinkedIn, search for Opportunity Zones in Kansas group page, and request to join, and one of our folks will get you added to that group. So the next question is about what else is the state going to do? The question has been mostly, I'm going to read verbatim from one of you, I'm sorry. We would like to hear from the state regarding their plans to craft additional incentives that can be used in opportunity zones. We're aware several state legislatures are working on incentives or are beginning to pass incentives. So, this is going to be an interactive and collaborative process going forward. At this point, the state has identified some resources that we have available. We've also put together some federal, state, and local level resources that we can discuss that can be paired with the program. However, at this point, we're considering the alternatives and the possibilities of enhancing some of our existing programs or exploring new programs. We really encourage you to reach out to your state agency representatives and your representatives in the legislatures and tell them what it is that is going to benefit and enhance this program for you. I can't make any promises, but this is going to be something that is locally led, and we encourage you to participate in this process. So as far as identifying what we already have going on here, at the federal level, we have historic tax credits, new markets tax credit, which Corp discussed is maybe a little more burdensome, but we're going to have a resources panel that can talk through how some of these things layer this afternoon. Rural Infrastructure Grant and Loan Program at the state level, and this is where we're going to come into play and where we can talk about how these policies and programs can be shaped to maybe enhance the Opportunity Zones program. And this is also where I encourage you to reach out to these regional folks to talk about these. Angel investors, there may be some nuance there that we need to sort out, but we believe that we can work all these through CDBG, HET, HPIP, KDHE, Brownfields program, so that's outside of commerce, but we encourage you to work with all agencies. Concur, Peak, RHID, State Historic Tax Credit, Star Bonds, Workforce AID. There's an interesting nuance here. Workforce AID is more targeted towards workforce development. So as employers are looking for places to open new businesses, they're looking for a supply of skilled labor. And Workforce AID can be shaped to this particular program. You know, if you have an opportunity zone and you want to bring in a new business and you think that you need to couple that with some skilled training, this is workforce aligned with industry demand, and this program may couple well there. And then there's also these local programs, and we actually have someone on our panel this afternoon who can speak to these more specifically. We have CIDs, electric rate incentive discounts, IRBs, local community foundations and job creation grants, NRP, property tax abatement, revolving loan funds, regional planning commissions, and TIFs. Again, more detail in that. If you have questions about how those work, we can get with our local resources. So how do these work together? Excuse me. So as we understand it now, there's really no limitation to the application of existing programs in opportunity zones. There is nothing that says that you can't do investment in opportunity zones and garnish those benefits and also use some of these other economic tools in your toolkit already. If the project meets state eligibility criteria, the program can be used. We will consider how we can continue to shape that and enhance those programs to further enhance the investment in these areas. But at this point, these programs are available, and our folks are happy to talk with you about how they interact with opportunity zones benefits. And again, the qualified opportunity funds are one funding tool for a project. I hear people talk about that a little bit. You know, this is equity investment. What about other financing options? And to my understanding, they are not mutually exclusive. And I encourage you to work with your advisors on how those work out in the best way. And again, that might be a good thing to chat with our resources about later. So this question mentioned some other items that they've seen coming from state initiatives in other states. This is true. There are proposed items of legislation in Ohio. They've proposed legislation to offer a tax credit for investments in opportunity zones. That is a 10% non-refundable tax credit on investments of $250,000 and above in a qualified opportunity zone. Now, the point of opportunity zones benefits is to create some long-term investment in these areas. This piece of legislation actually allows you to claim a tax credit in the year the investment is made. It also does not only apply to capital gains. So Ohio has found a way to incentivize some of that other financing that can go into an opportunity zone and provide their investors with a tax credit. Missouri has proposed legislation to set aside $30 million of their historic tax credit program for projects in opportunity zones. And those are pieces of legislation that are specific to opportunity zones. There's a couple of other items that are more general policies and program shifts. In Kentucky, they're doing red tape reduction. They are reviewing 5,000 different regulations for duplication and things that are no longer applicable to how business is being done. They're updating and they're modernizing. So that may reduce some of the burden on getting into programs and getting into investment and getting into projects in these areas and across the state. Arizona is doing something that is another general move. It is a licensing burden relief program. So for a lot of low-income folks, the mere cost of licensing yourself as a professional is prohibitive to entering the workforce. In Arizona, they realize that, and they are making changes and waiving some of those fees dependent on your income. Now, where this program works with low-income communities, and they have indicated that workforce is an issue, something like this might be beneficial in those areas. So those are some things that happen at a state level and in other states. If those are things that you think are beneficial to you, we're happy to have that conversation. We're happy to keep an open mind and consider things. We don't have anything moving forward at this point, but again, this is going to be an interactive process, and we're really looking to our communities to lead this program. So to that end, you've asked a lot about how do we get investment, how do we get projects, how do we move forward at a local level. So I'm going to go over some pretty rudimentary steps and some data that I received from these surveys. This is a very basic overview of how you engage with this program. At the first step, you need to engage your local stakeholders. There are a great number of you in the room. So we have our community points of contact. We have members of the chambers of commerce across the state. We have different economic development professionals. We have investors in this room. We have developers in this room. There are folks from your higher education institutions who are interested in this program and want to see it work for them. We have community foundations who want to see this work. This is their work. And if you can get these people in the same room to talk about what your priorities are, you are on your way. You're actually on your way at that point to step 2, which is identify what your priorities are. What do you want to see your economic development and social impact priorities to take shape through this program? You identified a lot of these in your letters to us. There are things you want to see happen in your communities. And this is what you need to talk about with your stakeholders. It's up to you to shape the program and how it works. It is going to be market-driven, and it's going to be locally driven. If you want to see particular priorities take shape, you need to talk about that. And you need to identify a strategy to address those needs. And you need to look at what your existing resources are. Some of your existing resources may be financing or funding that you have set aside for certain initiatives. They may be your community foundations or your nonprofits who have interests in certain programs. Your existing resources may be these economic tools that you already have in your toolkit available. So once you've kind of got this idea of where you are and what you have, you can identify your projects and your investment opportunities and how you're going to shape those. As Court mentioned, you need a good project to draw investment to. Opportunity zones is a benefit to investors. Investors are not going to show up just because there's a program. There needs to be a solid project to invest in. And it is your job to identify what those projects are. Now, the last part of this is how do we get to investors? Which it would behoove you as communities to put together what we're calling an investment prospectus. There's a lot of movement around local leadership here. There's a group called Accelerator for America. There's a group called New Localism. They are really encouraging locals to take these kinds of steps, make an inventory of your investment projects, and put them out to investors. I also provide them to your Kansas Department of Commerce so we can put them on our website. So we have some good news here, is that a lot of our communities have already moved forward in taking some of these steps. Part of that survey that some of you received, we asked about these items. We asked, have you engaged your local stakeholders? Have you conducted some community meetings? And 25 communities said yes. So they've included their county commissioners, chambers of commerce, community foundations, city councils and staff, local college staff, economic development staff and advisory groups, local newspapers, business and community leaders, and regional development associations, as well as neighborhood groups and local retailers. So that's a really good start on collaborating in your community. And so for the 25 of you who said yes, there are 7 communities who answered, who have not done this and might be asking for tips on how that gets done. Another important part of this in engaging your local stakeholders is engaging someone who is going to take leadership over this. 25 communities, again, have identified that they have someone who lead this program. As far as identifying economic development and social impact priorities, 20 communities have done this. They have identified that they need to improve the tax base. They need to work on job creation, capital investment, downtown revitalization, street and drainage improvements, and affordable housing. There are 12 communities who said that they have not worked on this. Again, I encourage you guys to talk to each other. Again, identifying these local resources and economic development tools. You guys have self-identified as having brownfield assessment grants, voter-approved sales taxes, IRBs, TIFs, CIDs, tax abatements, capital outlay funds, economic impact funds, job creation grants, neighborhood revitalization tax rebates. You're utilizing a lot of existing development tools. And 18 of these communities, so we're getting closer to the 50% mark here, have actually reached out and connected with potential investors or investor groups. The folks that you are talking to are local banks, investment groups, local CPAs to identify individuals with capital gains. And a lot of you say that you're not doing this because you're awaiting federal guidance. That has happened quite a bit across communities, and I think now that we have some clarification, we can move forward on that a bit. And another really great place to reach out, again, is your community foundations. They have connections and they have resources that are available to you. I have some contact information for community foundations if anyone is interested in getting connected with someone or isn't already connected with someone. So then this one, 81% said that they had actually identified projects or investment plans. This number looks very representative of what we saw in the selection process because we asked you to identify. Part of doing that is we needed to identify census tracts that were ready to take advantage of the benefits of this program. So then the next part is actually putting together that marketing plan. And 67% of you have actually taken the steps to start doing this. So that's great. And as you develop those, I do encourage you to share those with us so that we can market your investment opportunities on our website. And then there's a couple of examples of some local initiatives, people who have gone through these steps and have been pretty successful in putting together some investor outreach. In Erie, Pennsylvania, they are launching a website called Go Erie. They have the Pennsylvania Flagship Opportunity Zone group. They got together a group, it was the Erie Downtown Development Corporation and their Chamber of Commerce. They recruited 35 local organizations to sit around the same table and talk about what their priorities were for economic development in their community. And they tell their story, very well. And they have priorities, they have projects identified, and they are pushing that out to folks. And they're getting a lot of attention for it. I sat down and talked with them. They really got this to go by sitting in a room with 2 people and calling people and telling them about the program and encouraging them to participate. This is what it takes sometimes to get yourselves together. I have links and additional information about their program. If you want to look at their materials, they're a great example of what can be done. Also in Newark, New Jersey, they did something similar. They hosted an investor education day, and they took investors on a field trip around the city to look at investment sites. And if you guys have investment property, you want folks to look at, invite people to come out, take them around, and show them the opportunity in your area. So, I encourage you, again, to kind of go through these steps, identify what you need. Reach out to us, reach out to your regional program folks, and there's some time for questions and answers in the resources panel this afternoon. And that's all I have for you, but I'm happy to take any questions here. There's one.
So the field day you were talking about, that
Yeah.
example, that would be after you've acquired the properties, right? I mean, it just to kind of bring in the first speaker, because you wouldn't really, there's, for instance, in our community, there are a lot of potential buildings that could be, but we have to purchase those. I mean, we have to have access to those. So you wouldn't do an investor field day just to go around and show potential. You would actually have to have the properties, right?
I would probably focus on properties that you had some control over,
Yeah,
certainly.
right.
Okay. So we are going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back and we'll have our panel.
Last minute instructions. So I think we've gotten to the point where probably the people who are left really want to hear what the panel has to say. So we're going to start off, I'm going to let them self-introduce, give a little brief introduction of what services their agency or entity that they represent can offer to you. And then we will begin with questions. I have a couple of questions from the survey that we took that I will kick off with, and then we'll open it to the floor. So.
Hello, I'm Monica Breedy. I am the East Central Regional Project Manager for the Kansas Department of Commerce. I'm on the panel to help address any questions you may have about the Kansas incentives. You definitely want to bring in any of the regional project managers that are in your area while working through the opportunity zones, because there could be state incentives that could qualify some of those opportunity zones that the investors would see as a benefit as well. So definitely make us part of your team. We are all available, and if we do not know the answers, then we will find the answers for you, just so that we know that we're giving you the correct information. So just please include all of us on your team.
I'm Taylor Durst with Adams Brown Barron Ball. I'm a manager in our Great Bend office. We service about 14 locations across the state of Kansas for their accounting needs. And for this, we're looking to help provide any resources with accounting and the tax questions that have arisen.
Good afternoon. My name is Harvey Sorensen. I'm an attorney with the Folsom Seacon Law Firm. Our firm is in Wichita, Topeka, and Overland Park. I'm in the Wichita office. I'm a corporate and income tax lawyer. I do a lot of economic development work. I'm currently working very actively in the Opportunity Zone area. We've formed and funded so far well over $100 million in deferred gains, and we're looking forward to running that number up some more by the end of the year. So we're very active in this field. My partner, who's the head of our tax department, Chris Hurst, and I will be around after the program if you have any questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Norton. I'm also an attorney. I'm with the law firm of Gilmore & Bell. I'm in the Wichita office. We have offices also in Kansas City, Omaha, St. Louis, and Salt Lake City. We're a public finance firm, generally known as bond counsel to many of the cities. I think they're here today. We also get involved in economic development activities, and I think my role here on the panel is to kind of see how some of the other more traditional types of public finance can be melded into the Opportunity Zone framework and talk with that respect.
I'm Court Maxwell, I spoke earlier.
Thank you. So the first question that is on our list was the potential for creating and administrating a local, regional, or project-specific opportunity zone fund. I believe they are wanting to know what is that potential. Court pretty much probably answered that, but did any of the other panelists have a response to that?
Once I learn how to use the equipment. I would anticipate that most of these funds are going to be created by either self-funded by taxpayers with large gains or by fund administrators, because the administrative side of the process is going to be rather complex. In order to be a fund, you're going to have deferred capital gains investors to fund it. So while you can, I assume by this question, what we're wondering is whether the government entity itself could create the local, regional, or project-specific fund. I don't think there's anything prohibition against sponsoring it, but it may not be very successful.
One thing to add, I think that we're going to basically have three primary groups that are going to play in this marketplace. I think I agree with Harvey. You're going to have some self-funded funds for existing development groups that are used to doing this all the time. This just makes it a more attractive investment and a bigger opportunity for returns. I think you're going to have the entities or individuals that have large capital gains that are looking to make the investments and take advantage of the tax benefits that go with that. They may not necessarily have projects. And then I think you have the third group, which are the people who have the projects that they want to do and are looking for equity or funding to help assist in those projects. And I think one of the challenges that you as economic development people are going to have is, one, for that group that does this all the time and they have the funds, showing them that you have opportunity zones in your community and this would be a good place for them to do their next project. I think with respect to the other two sides of the equation, your challenge is going to be, if you've got the entity that has a project to do is finding the group that's got the fund and the money to make it work, or vice versa. And I think that's probably the most of you are going to have that challenge of matching those two together, is where I think that's going to go.
Yeah, I think I answered the first question. I'm going to play off of what Joe said there and what we're seeing out on the streets right now. And the market is incredibly fragmented. Sort of the middleman infrastructure hasn't come together. I think Joe did a nice job, but I think about the market in sort of two ways, right? You have those high net worth individuals or people that had events over here. You have the developers or entrepreneurs that have the project over here. And then the thing that usually connects this and makes a market, right, is all the middlemen in the middle. And a lot of us here are all affectionately middlemen. But there's also, go through the different programs, 1031 exchangers, DSTs, EB5s, brokers, wealth managers, advisors, all of that sort of industry is looking at how do they play this. And frankly, very few of them have the answers right now. They're sitting in these same type of forums all across the country and figuring out what their play is. And because we don't have that middleman infrastructure, the market's unbelievably fragmented right now. The bid-ask spread is really high. You've got the folks that have the $100 million that's sitting in an account, and they don't know where good projects are, and you've got the folks with the projects are that can't sniff out how do you find this new source of capital that's never existed before. So I don't have a great answer for that. The market is going to be made out there of those two ultimately matching up. Middlemen are going to come into this and figure that out. We're sort of trying to serve that role in the smallest of way by just being out and talking about this again and again and again and sort of taking in what are people playing it, how are they playing it, what do they need, and trying to match that up. We're incredibly inefficient at it. We'll admit that, as it's just in my head or from the 20 attorneys we have working on this. But that infrastructure is going to have to form, and there's folks all across the country sort of working on forming that infrastructure so we can match those up.
What are the parameters of what the money can or cannot fund? The example is, if we have a business expansion in which the company needs a new road or electric infrastructure, is infrastructure fundable within the project?
Well, when reading this question, I assume the question is whether the fund can build the road or build the pipe, the transmission lines and so forth. And they have to be engaged in an active trade or business inside the zone, either through a partnership corporation or owning the business directly. So if you're talking about a toll road, which is an active trade or business, or electric transmission line where you get paid, the answer is yes. But if you're talking about just public infrastructure, no.
What about the driveway into the business, or like if there's needing an access road?
Are you talking about, if you're talking about public improvements, or are you talking about, and who you're talking about buying that, paying for it?
So if they're investing into the business,
The business needs a road to go in, and the business wants to pay for it, then sure.
So that, then the funds
It's
would be
part
able
of
to
the
pay for
total
that.
project.
Okay.
Yeah, this is probably where I come in more to play, because I think I read that in a little different context. I'm used to working and representing municipalities and governmental entities as opposed to the private development side. And typically, I think this is going to be just like most other developments, where there's going to be a component that is, off property, basically. In order to make this work, we talked about the driveway on the business property being able to be funded. But in order to get to that, you may have to have public infrastructure improvements that are generally owned and financed and constructed by governmental entities. And I think we're seeing more and more of, a typical transaction like this has a development agreement that's got many players involved. We've all got the professionals Corp talked about, and everybody puts a little piece together, and the governmental entity puts a little bit of incentive involved, whether that's a special assessment for a road or providing for parking off-site for customers, things like that. And I think that those kinds of off-site things are probably not what the Opportunity Zone money is for. But I think those of you that work with government need to be realizing that in almost every transaction I've had, projects like this, there is a public component to make that project work, to get infrastructure, to get parking, whatever things that governments typically do.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Great. Yeah, this is a question in regards to, is there a minimum threshold for investment that needs to be made to really make an Opportunity Zone work, or for the fund to really work, to be worthwhile for a project? Particularly these downtown projects where the building might be $250,000, $300,000 to buy, but it's $1 million to fix the building to be operational. Is that really enough? Like with new market tax credits, you need it to be $5 million or more to make it work. Which is part of the problem with that deal.
11.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, you need to be 11 million to make it work, by the way. But I like your spirit, Greg, of putting it at 5. Everybody in this room loves to hear that. I'll go first, and I'm sure everybody will have thoughts. And it's great that we've got attorneys and accountants in this. I think the threshold is actually very, very low, but you got to do it right. If you want to go do a multi-investor, multi-asset fund with lots of different strategy and things like that, and many different business lines to it, if we can get it to that point, that is going to be expensive. That is going to take the folks at this table spending a lot of money and a lot of time to make it work. The testing to make the asset test work is going to be hard. Harvey are forming your fund and going through all of that and creating that and making sure that you're compliant in every form and fashion. That's going to be hard, and there's going to be expense in that. Take it the other way, though. Take it that an individual has $50,000 and they want a deferred gain, and they want to go buy a house in their community, and they want to improve it, and they want to rent it out. Well, as long as that fund, right, which is really just a single purpose, special purpose asset there, that we sort of do that first creation of that, and we get that deal going, And our accountant is supposed to do his asset tests and everything on it, but what's there to test? It doesn't own anything else. It's all sitting right there, one single house in the zone, and you're doing the deal. It's not that much, right? The compliance cost just doesn't have a ton to it. So I think early movers, there's going to be substantial expense in this, and like every good thing that happens sort of in our market is as we keep making widgets again and again and again, us in this sort of widget making industry are going to get more efficient, and the cost is going to come down, and we're going to be able to bring the cost down. And I hate to sort of bag on new markets, which I didn't mean to do, I've done so many times here, but the beauty also of this program and the amazing thing that's different from sort of self-certification is that comes about with self-certification and comes about from that sort of other point that there's not US Bank that's just buying all of the credits out there in the world, is it's really how we're going to do deals and what's going to happen. It's going to be our legal opinions and their accounting that ends up making these, and we're going to do it deal by deal by deal. So no one person is going to control the market, and there's not going to be a gang of attorneys that can come and charge $900 an hour and represent every single part of this and inflate the price that it costs to do it, like what happened to new markets, and we pushed up to $11, $12 million transactions that have to happen. So sorry the rest of the panel spoke so long, but early thoughts.
I'll let you respond first.
You can't do a deal that doesn't make economic sense. And so there is no minimum except practicality. You've got to buy the asset, then you've got to either substantially improve it or build something new, and then you have to manage the fund. So $50,000 investment, you should probably work bond. It's hard to see it with a $10,000 investment or 20, but it's going to be driven by the economics. It's not by the law.
Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I get the same, I've had this question for years. Does it make sense to do an IRB for a $250,000 small mom and pop, manufacturing operation? Well, if you're going to go out and do a public offering, no. But if you've got a willing local lender and you've got a local community member who's got that kind of gain that's willing to work with local people in the community, then yeah, that can happen. But it's not going to be the full-blown, let's do a great big fund, let's go do a public offering, hire a Wall Street investment banker to go sell the paper. There's no way that's going to happen. And I think in smaller communities, we see it happen every day. Where public incentives through issuance of IRBs or this can be done at the $500,000 level efficiently if you've got people that want to get that done, local investors and local lenders.
Next question.
I just wanted to say something real quick, but the most tax benefit, like Corbin said earlier, is that after 10 years of investment. So you would just want to make sure that the whatever minimum investment you get has the most stable growth to grow that to the 10-year mark to where you can potentially see the most benefit out of it.
Can this be used retroactive? We had a business in our community that came in, that opened in June, and it's a manufacturing business. Can we do a fund for them for their new growth? They are in the opportunity zone.
So we get this question a fair amount, and we got some new components of the guidance here that said if deals happen in 2018, that there may be chances to be able to sort of go back and look at those deals. And if you look kind of at the purpose test I talked about and the entity test and all of those things, you may be able to do it, and we may be able to sort of amend and restate the operating agreement of how it was done and sort of put a little salve on the wound and put the magic words in there and things like that and get through that. The bigger problem that I run into often with these deals that happened earlier in the year is, did folks capitalize it the right way? Can you go back through their balance sheet and actually find that they had an event 180 days before that and we put in deferred capital gains? And oftentimes you can't.
what's happened is fresh equity has gone into the deal, right? And the problem with fresh equity is we're allowed to have mixed funds. You're allowed to have funds that have both fresh equity and this deferred capital gains, and I don't think anybody disagrees on this, but I've had some really uncomfortable moments all over the country where we've had folks that were arguing that you could use fresh equity and get the 10-year exit benefits, right? You obviously, if you had fresh equity, you couldn't get a deferral and a step up, but people arguing about sort of getting the exit benefits. And you can't get that. That's not what this is about. This is about deferred capital gains. So if you use fresh equity, you get none of the benefits. So the problem is if you can't go back and look through the deal and find deferred capital gains, they have no benefit. Now you could recapitalize for future things, sort of having a mixed fund there, but it's already tainted, and then some portion is always going to be attributed sort of regular tax treatment, while the other portion could have this favorable tax treatment. So it's kind of, you got to go take those individually. We got to go look at it. That's not an easy answer. Lots of work to be done there, but giving you kind of the high level of the things we've seen and the problems we're working through.
I think, unless I misunderstood the question, where you guys, I thought she was saying, new business made phase 1. And now, next year, phase 2 is contemplated. Will that work in this structure? Is that
Right, this is a business that just don't, we got our designation in March, and they started in June. So had we had this kind of information prior, we may have been able to do something.
So it's still
Yeah.
I'll figure out how to reach this equipment eventually. If on a go-forward basis for the phase 2, then that's easily doable. You have to work on the ownership of the property and make sure that you don't blend it, have a separate fund, separate ownership, depending on what the property is used for. It might have to be leased from one side or the other. It has to be an active trader business, but I think going back, what Corp says is not realistic.
Thank you.
Maybe another version of that question is if you've got a business that's been there for a very long time, but decides it wants to do a significant expansion, can the concept be applied to that expansion of a business that was already?
So you start out, the question obviously starts with where's the capital gain coming from that's going to be invested in the fund? So the rollover, I mean, we get rollover questions all the time, and I think it's pretty clear that you can't, if you want to recognize the gain and then reinvest it in the fund, so that it owns essentially the same asset, you can't take more than 19% of it. It has to be less than 20. And that's not very realistic. If they want to expand and somebody else is willing to bring in the capital and then have an economic arrangement that allows that capital to be rewarded, yes, that's easily done.
Aren't there ownership questions there you have to address basically? Because if I'm a family business that's been there 20 years and I want to expand 2 years from now using somebody else's equity, but I don't want to sell my business to them, you got a problem.
Well, and you're not going to take their equity into your business. It's going to have to be a lease or some sort of capitalized arrangement.
We're all saying the same thing, but this is why it kind of goes back to my original point. The first movers in all of this is likely going to be the real estate projects, right? Because we can all sort of get our heads around, wrap them around of doing sort of a new real estate deal out there. And then it's additional levels of complexity as we go down the line to figure it out with operating businesses and operating business expansions and all of that. I believe we'll ultimately all get there, but it's going to take a while, and that's not going to be first inning style stuff.
So I have a community industrial park that's owned by my city where I can gift the ground to someone. So what's going to be considered the baseline for a substantial improvement when part of my incentive package is I'm giving them this as their project and they're building their building? Is all of the building then that they do going to be considered substantial improvement?
Yes. I mean, again, it goes all back to that original point that if you're doing ground up construction, it's almost always going to work, right? It's almost always going to work, but at the end of the day, yeah, you're giving in the ground is starting there 0, and then we're gonna build a building on it. That's a perfect project. You just nailed it.
And I think I know the answer to this one, but if you have an existing building and you're putting an addition on it, say you buy it, and you have all your funds qualified, yada, 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 you have another building you're building on it, if you connect the foundations and the roofs and the structures, is that, as long as it's substantially the same amount per the value of that other building, the original part of the building, does that count? I don't know that I said that correctly, but you have an existing building, you're adding to it.
We all keep, it all keeps coming, like, we're keep answering various versions of the same question, right? What's the problem is it new? You've got to start with something new to the fund. And did we acquire that in 2018 and close on it or otherwise, or has this been hanging around for years as an existing building or an existing business?
So, yeah, I'm saying, hey, it's in an opportunity zone.
It's a brand new deal, you go and buy it?
I go and buy it, you got the ground, you got an existing building on it, you expand on the existing building.
Great, all we got to figure out is did you substantially improve it by doubling the basis, right? We take out the land and we're off to the races.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that works where, I think that works where what doesn't work is, I've already owned the building.
Yeah.
And now, I think the whole theory behind this, remember, is that this is an equity investment. The fund comes in and buys an ownership interest in whatever they are investing in. So if I'm a mom and pop business and I don't want to have a partner that's got more than, 80% basically, then it's not going to work.
Yeah, and I should probably explain that a little more. I'm just saying, for a specific example, if it's an apartment complex and it's, one 12-plex side or, 112 units, and if you bought it, you really don't have anything substantially due to that building because it's in good shape, it's decent, but it comes with 5 or 10 acres of ground. If you go in and you connect the foundations and the roofs and or the catwalks or something like that, does that still count as substantial improvement of that building since you're quote-unquote adding an addition to it? I'm looking at it from the real estate perspective, not the business perspective, because then otherwise, how do you substantially improve that building if the substantial rehab is there? So will it count with the substantial rehab? Does that count? Or does it not count towards the substantial rehab and the addition to it, if you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah. You guys want to go?
No, I think it
I think it works, right? I mean, you would have to have, the rule would have to be is that we somehow have 2 pieces of property, right? You bought this 1 5-acre tract, and now they're sort of the same deal, and you're doubling it with another building on it. I think that works. I don't think that we're running afoul. I see kind of where you're worried.
You don't even have to connect the buildings.
We don't. There's nothing in the statute or guidance that tells us anything about having to go connect buildings.
Gotcha.
I think if you bought the existing building on the east side of town and you built the addition on the west side of town, then that probably wouldn't work.
Understand.
But if it's a single tract of ground, it hasn't been split, it's not platted, then I think it was just fine.
Perfect, because I was getting confused because I thought, well, if they have to be the same building is where I was getting confused. Does it have to be the same building? But if it doesn't have to be the same building, it makes it that much easier.
It has to be the same business. It's an active business. So how do you define the business? The business is this multi-family rental project located at the corner of X and Y.
Understood.
Hello, my name is Sheena Schmidt with the City of Topeka. Coming at this from a community perspective and thinking about the original intent of the law, how do we structure marketing or awareness or ensure that projects are, meeting the intent of the community and also serving the underserved communities that the projects are going to be designated in? Specifically, if I could think of an example, what larger communities and cities have experienced, like displacement and other things like that.
I know this is going to come out. I probably just should leave it alone. I really should, but I'm going to do it. I just don't buy the gentrification thing and that we're displacing massive amounts of the population, and none of the data shows that, right? If you go through the data, and we can pull out the EIG sort of information and go through it, the number of census tracts that are actually showing gentrification and we're throwing folks out of their home is incredibly small. And you know where it's even smaller? In Kansas, right? This is not a big concern or a big issue that we have. And so I just don't think that's a criticism that's out there of this program. I personally want to see as much development as we possibly can, as much economic development as we possibly can, and I want to grow these census tracts, and I think we're going to be just fine on those issues. So, sorry.
I'll come at it from a little bit different angle. I mean, unless you got what I would call a catalyst site that the city or the economic development entity owns, this is just private property that happens to be located in an area that you've asked for and got approval for an opportunity zone. So if it's a raw piece of ground that Mr. X owns and they're not asking for any city incentives to do their project, I mean, you're not involved. It's all federal tax at that point in time. Now, if they come to the city and say, I want you to do a CID, I want you to do an IRB with tax abatement, and you decide from a policy standpoint, no, that's not the kind of business you want to encourage, then you have some say in it. But otherwise, it's just a private investment.
Or if you want to encourage it, give it
Yeah.
affordability, you want to make affordable units or something, you can do that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to say, great, if somebody wants to build a low and moderate housing over there, we're happy to help you. That's something you can incentivize. But if it's just, I want to go in and build a manufacturing facility and make widgets, and they don't ask for any public incentives, you don't really have a role to play if you have no ownership in that property. Unless there's a zoning issue, maybe just, you get no additional rights, I guess, because this is in an opportunity zone. As I understand it.
I would add to that, that concern does come up quite a bit, and I assume that since you're in Topeka, you're looking at the downtown Topeka development specifically. One of the mitigating factors there is that this program itself is not going to create a market demand where it doesn't already exist. So a wise investor is not going to come into an area that does not have the population to support high-cost, high-rise apartments and set that up where the community just really isn't going to support that kind of rental market. So there is some balancing in the market for those concerns. It is a concern that people have talked about, and it's something that you can talk about, you know, where you mentioned if at the city level that is something that you want to encourage some housing development along those lines, but you want to maintain a market for your lower income populations, you can carve out a percentage of that development to be reserved for affordable housing. But that is a community-based and city-based decision. That's
question I had was concerning, somebody mentioned about publicly city-owned property. We've got one of our census tracts is the area around our airport. Most of that is owned by the airport authority. Are there any issues related to that ground? Would they have to do a land lease? I mean, most of it they'd be able to sell, but some of it, due to FAA restrictions, they have to retain ownership to some degree. Is that a possibility? We're splitting hairs again.
I don't think it would be a problem, and since the cost of the land is excluded from the calculations, it even probably makes it better if it's leased.
Let me put a twist. We represent cities that have airport authorities, and their view is that we'll be happy to assist you in building a building on our ground, but you're never going to own it. It's going to be owned by the airport authority. It's going to be leased to you for substantially a long period of time with rollovers. We don't want to see you leave, but you're never going to have, from a state law standpoint, an ownership interest in that facility. So this may become more of our tax question here for our accountant, is if that is a 30-year lease with 2 10-year options, is that tax ownership that might work for this project as opposed to, you know, state law real property ownership?
And Court kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, I think, but I don't know if the regulations are there yet to support that title holder type of lease arrangement where improvements are owned by the the fund and would qualify.
Yeah, typically the financing for those kind of projects, the lender gets a leasehold mortgage. They don't have any mortgage in the fee, but they've got the right to occupy that facility or foreclose on that leasehold mortgage for the balance of the lease term. And projects get done that way, but the company is never going to do it. Now, again, depending upon, I think, I know enough about this to be really dangerous probably, but depending on how the airport got the property, if they got that property with some federal FAA type funds, there's probably going to be some additional strings or restrictions that you're going to have to follow irregardless of this program.
I don't have the answer.
Oh, okay.
I'm not nearly as smart as you guys. That raised another question that has come up in communities that I've visited is, talk about the city-owned, there are some opportunity zones that universities own. And those universities have talked about leasing the land for a building to be built for the businesses, not just one business, but for multiple businesses to then occupy that building. And that's allowed, it's along the same lines of what you just stated, correct?
I think so. I think it's one of our biggest opportunities, and what the state did was designating our various universities, and we have Wichita State that's been the most aggressive in this and done an amazing job and come up with everything they're doing on the campus, and I think this is only going to spur that. And I think we have other opportunities that are going to happen at KU Med, KU Hospital, KU, K-State, others all throughout our state, that there's going to be options out there. I think the other thing that's exciting about that, and I was talking to someone early about it, is, and I think this was where the state was headed, and Jordan or Bob or others can speak to it, is the ability for sort of tech transfer and commercialization, right? As we're rolling out sort of innovative ideas and things out of our universities, how do we now look at this to form those startup businesses with that, use opportunity zones to attract equity funding and cheaper equity funding for it, and really grow the business enterprise of Kansas, not just on the real estate deals that I'm doing and talking about, but at the sort of heart of this law of trying to grow the real economy out there, and I think that's something the state got right for sure.
I was responsible for the design of the Wichita State University Innovation Campus, and all of that is on leased, all those projects are on leased land. Now, some of it's state-owned, and so you have to go to the Board of Regents to get consent for it. In their case, some of it is not state-owned. Some of the other entities within the university didn't require state approval. So leased land is entirely possible in these projects, but there may come with, because they're in the university environment, they may come with additional requirements.
One of the projects that we had in mind when we applied to be an opportunity zone was a downtown museum building that was planning, let's say, a $4 million renovation project. Buildings worth about $500,000, or buildings worth about $500,000 on the tax rolls today, needing $4 million of improvements. It seems difficult to understand, is there an opportunity to have investors come forward and buy, let's say 80%, I guess is what we're hearing now, or buy the building, make the improvements, and then at the end of 10 years, sell that back to the museum. And the museum will be operating the whole time.
Yes, from a legal standpoint, this could work. I think the piece you have to get to at the end of the day of being involved with lots of entertainment deals and lots of museum deals and things like that that I've done is, remember, this program's about making money. You have to have an appreciating asset that sort of produces a return, and why I can probably get you low-cost equity, right? Very cheap equity, especially if you have sort of local social impact investors and otherwise. My gut is that you don't need low-cost equity. What you need is lots of charitable donations, right? And so you're not going to sort of move the needle on deals that need to be done charitably with low-cost sort of equity, because this is really about lower cost equity from that. So you got to have a profitable project, but if you think it's going to be profitable and you think that you can end up, buying it back for that $4 million later, and because of that, we can sort of have investors that want to come in, maybe, but it's about making money.
And then they keep asking, what if some of those investors agree to forgive their investment? Will they have a tax opportunity as a donation? I know,
We're asking for a friend.
We're asking for a friend because we just keep going, I don't know yet.
So, backing up, it has to be an active, if it's going to be opportunity zone funds that you want to use for this, it has to be an active trade or business. And as Corp said at the beginning of the speech, triple net leases aren't going to work. So the economics of that arrangement probably aren't going to work.
Okay.
If it's an opportunity zone investment at the end of 2026, they have to pay the tax, and forgiving that property at that time may generate the charitable deduction in that year, depending on what their income is, what the rules are. I mean, it's not at all clear that that would necessarily work purely from a tax perspective. And from an economic perspective, you're really looking for charitable donations to your 501c3, I think. I agree with Corp on that.
Thank you.
Question on refinance, I guess, for these type of projects. So once you get the building built and you get it refinanced, how is the funds treated if there's any gain? For example, you got a mixed use building, you build it, get your tenants in there, you go to refinance it. How are those funds treated?
So this is where it gets super interesting, and there's going to be lots of people that probably close their eyes and are bored out of their mind, right, with this. But this is where it gets fun to start thinking about this with real estate developers and real estate deals, and thinking about refinance and getting into actually what equity and debt structures are going to be and how people are going to do deals and are they going to change. And we could go on about that for literally an hour, but let me give you the sort of broad rule, and then we can, if we want to keep diving in, further apply it. And the idea would be, we believe you'll be able to put leverage on it, right? And the regs are good on leverage, but the key here is you can't put leverage on it out of the business down below, pull it up to the fund, and then distribute that out. You've blown your tax treatment then. You've blown everything that you're trying to achieve. What we think is actually could be a way that you do some components of that that are going to be interesting, though, is if you think about it, I'm grabbing basis during time as I do that 5-year and that 7-year component, and after I pay my tax in 2026, I grab all of my basis there. And at that point, can I take some refinance proceeds? And is that actually a way I smooth this in some ways, that my investor has put in their money here in 18 and 19, they're earning a return, they're also paying less tax, but they got to pay that tax. Could I take some, if the capital markets are working, could I put some debt on the property then to pay the tax at that point, and then write it out till 10 in a day and sell and take all my upside? So probably too much for this room, but at least stuff to start thinking about as you think through refinance and leverage.
So there's loopholes.
Yes. So yeah, Harvey's, that's not a loophole, intent of the law. And to all my speech earlier about Greg, that this was going to be super cheap, let's not kid ourselves. We're going to find a way to make a living on this as well.
And you should. So here is a scenario that I sort of get lost in as I'm even trying to think through it, but there's a 501c3 who has been involved in a restoration project on obviously on an existing building, going to be restoration, but anyway. So in 2018, they purchased empty land next to them. Now, prior to your talk earlier, I was thinking opportunity fund, but now I'm thinking, so say this 501c3 partners with some developers, and we purchase other buildings in the community, other properties, say 2 other properties. Then we form the fund, and the fund buys, we sell those properties to this, and put, we sell it to the fund, so that we can finish our restoration project. But where is the developer that partnered with us? Where are they in this, in terms of any future opportunity? See, I got lost too, and I think I lost.
Let me try, and I'll just try to tie it back to what I said earlier. The one thing that I see of a strategy there is, how do you use this 501c3 to be your friendly land-holding partner that goes and grabs and puts things under contract and is able to sort of control the dirt, so that you can go through the hardest part of development is sort of that land aggregation, getting the right pieces, and then they can flip it for low cost, no cost, or their exact cost, right, to the development party that's going to use the OZs to make this work. I think there's a strategy there. I'm not sure about all the other stuff.
If I could, so just to make it even more complicated a little bit, but that lease thing you were talking about. So on the property that's next to it, that we would expand onto, we have an opportunity to do housing, affordable housing above it. Wouldn't want to lose control of the property of the 501c3 property, but we would be interested in leasing the air, or selling the air, or whatever. How's that?
It's late in the day, you're making my head hurt.
I'm sorry.
I think there's all types of plays. Fred's here, others are here, of how do we work with OZs and affordable housing and programs like that. I think there's a strategy there. I think you're getting into some pretty interesting areas of air rights and condominiums and things like that. And you need a lot of help on all that stuff. So.
I have a question on, let's say you have a $40 million manufacturing project that wants to go into an opportunity zone. We have some greenfield sites. Is it to the advantage to use conventional financing like an IRB, or is it to the advantage to use this new opportunity zone funding?
I'll give the real easy one and turn it over to the expert here. Both. So I want to use OZs to increase my return and make the project work better. And I want to go to Joe in your city and say, give me an IRB for sales tax exemption and for my property tax abatement on it as well.
Agree.
Okay. It's equity and debt, so.
Right.
Okay. You need both.
Yeah. The thing that you need to realize, to maximize your benefits on sales tax or property tax, you only get what's funded with the bond proceeds. And so you've got the equity piece coming in from the OZ, and then you've got a debt component. And if you're only funding the debt component, not the equity piece, and the equity piece is going in as cash, we may be able to do a subordinate bond, company owned. There may be a way to get that done, but you can always have 100 cents. And so, I think that's why those can work together. Yeah. So basically, I think you've got all the tools that we had, before last year, and now this just enhances the equity component for an investor coming in, and hopefully a lower cost of that than they would have otherwise.
Okay, I have another question. I'm supposed to be answering questions, but somebody have questions. And this is kind of on behalf of the communities, because I'd heard some folks speaking before that it would be nice to have the state opportunity zone fund that would then help all the communities because they feel like it'd be very expensive to have their own fund. So all the experts up here, what would be the cost of managing a fund for a community?
Don't do it. I mean, the state doesn't need a fund. You as communities don't need funds. You need to stay in the lane that you guys know so well, is to find your properties, encourage your developers, market it, work with your high net worth locals to invest local. That's your play. I love Bob, I love Jordan, I love the Department of Commerce. I don't think they want to get into trying to underwrite deals. I wouldn't encourage them to get into the business of underwriting deals. We don't need to be doing that as a state. And if we don't need to be doing that as a state, we don't need to be doing that as local communities, right? That's not what you guys do every day or know. You know how to market your communities and grow jobs. You don't need to be in the fund management business. And if we start from the point, there's going to be plenty of equity out there. Find good projects. You're going to be fine.
So with that, the investors are the ones that are paying the fees for the fund. Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's an opportunity there for the state to participate. I don't know that it's necessarily in creating and managing the fund. I think there are opportunities for advertising is not the right term, helping marketing that fund in conjunction with somebody else. The one thing that comes to my mind is I know we have this fund at the state for college savings program. It's been sponsored by the state, but I don't think the state manages the money and takes care of all that kind of stuff. So, maybe you form a coalition or you have an agreement or a contract with someone to market, and you become the intermediary between a fund or some group of funds or whatever it is to work with the local communities who have the business person that wants to expand and doesn't have access to the money. Maybe you can help put those together. Because if you're selling interest in these funds, you're selling a security, you've got state and federal securities laws. I don't know that you necessarily really want to get involved in that. I think that's good advice. Mark?
It's kind of tagging along on that. Would you recommend any of the local financing institutions that might have high net wealth customers to explore setting up funds by themselves, or still keep it outside of that?
I think you're going to find institutions that do that. I think you also maybe have the opportunity, depending on the size of your community and how well these institutions get along, maybe they want to form a coalition. I think certain cities have those already to make seed money loans, things like that, and maybe they want to do that fund, but that's their group fund. It's not a city fund or a county fund or a state fund. I think you're going to find institutions interested in doing that.
I'm trying to, I guess reconcile the idea that it's probably not in our best interest to start a lot of local funds with the idea that what you may have is funds that are driven by people who are interested in a good investment, which may not be what the local people see benefit in, right? So, I don't know, maybe we just did a grocery store project, for example, is one of those that with a good social benefit, not a lot of return. So if we're not going to start our own fund, we want to work with an existing fund, maybe something like what Mr. Sorensen, you've got investors potentially that are looking for return. So here's my question, I guess. Could I take one of my local investors who has an interest in making an investment in, say, that grocery store and funnel it through your fund? One of the things that's going through my mind is, another type of pool investment like community foundations do. It's a no-no to direct my personal funds into that pooled investment and say, oh, I'd like to fund a scholarship that someone in my family is going to benefit from. So is there a similar no-no to investing in your pooled investment and saying, I'd like it to go to XYZ in
These are not
Stafford County?
donor-directed funds, okay? I mean, this is not the community foundation where you give them the money and tell them where to put it. I mean, these are business deals. So the person who's making the investment, your social investor who wants to invest in this business, they can set up their own private fund and be the only owner of the fund. They do not need to go through somebody else and pay, fees. And on funds that have multiple investors, you're going to pay Corb, you're going to pay me, you're going to pay him a lot of money to figure out how you get in, how you get out, how do you transfer it, what happens if this happens, what happens if this happens. You end up in agreements 150 pages long. You want to invest in your own fund, own 100% of yourself? You've got a 5-page agreement. So, I mean...
I totally understand that. So what's the distinction between don't set up a fund on your local community?
The difference is who's the sponsor of the fund. I'm talking about your investor guy has got capital gains and he wants to invest it in this business. So your investor person sets up a fund and is the only owner of the fund. It has to be a partnership. I mean, there's some kind of tax complexities as you work your way through this, but the idea would be to have a very small controlled fund. It's not owned by the government. It's not managed by the government. It's not, you may encourage people to do it, but you don't have a direct interest in the fund. The investors have the fund, and they negotiate the deal with the owner and operator of the grocery store as to what their return's going to be on their money. You don't have to get in the middle of that. These are all business transactions, and each business transaction is going to be different. The investor is going to have different expectations as to returns, back participation, control. I mean, you don't want to be in the middle of that.
Let me pose the hypothetical question, kind of taking off on what she's saying. Okay, they want to do the $1 million project, and the guy doesn't want to put $1 million into it. He wants 2 of his good buddies, and the 3 of them go together and do that. Is that realistic? What goes on with that?
It's absolutely realistic, but the way that I would set that up and I would talk to them, Joe, is I would say, and it kind of goes to everything I've been saying, the fund is critical, right? But the fund is critical with these multi-assets and things like that. Focus on the project. Find more good grocery store deals that are $1 million deals, and then you actually have the qualified opportunity zone business that would be set up of doing that grocery store deal. And then I can have the Joe Fund, the Corb Fund, and the Harvey Fund all come in for our $250,000 component to make that work. We don't have to be in one big community fund in any form or fashion. And frankly, it may be the Corb Fund that's deferred capital gains and the Joe Fund that's deferred capital gains, and Harvey's super charitable and he just wants to throw in fresh equity in the deal, or he wants to throw in even a charitable contribution some way, right? We can figure all that out. Focus on the project, focus on the business, focus on the same things you all have been focusing on for decades. Don't sort of lose your head about having to try to figure out fund world. That's kind of our job in this, and we'll figure it out for a structure for you, but focus on the project and you'll be just fine.
100% right.
Okay, any other question?
So then as a community, if we have a project and we're ready to go, then do we go to Kansas Department of Commerce and say, okay, have a project, how can you help us get this project in front of the right people to, once we're at that step, we've got our prospectus, as she had said, to put together our plan for how this is going to work and how we think opportunity zones can play into this. Is that where we start reaching out to Commerce and you help us match up with a team like this?
I believe, based on what Jordan said earlier, is that then we can market for you through the equity, I want to see your face when I'm talking to you, that we can market through our website as an opportunity zone if investors wanted to come there to see what was possible in Kansas. And then those investors, based on what these guys have said, would then set up their corporation, LLC fund. It's not like they're I'm getting confused with thinking of fund and thinking of my personal IRA, but that's not what these guys are setting up. They're setting up an LLC, it's their own little stock that they're doing. It's not going to the stock market or anything, it's just going into a pool of money that they put there as an LLC or corporation.
I promise you, if it's a good deal and it works, and you let Commerce know about it, or you let one of us know about it, and I know tons of people in this room that I've kicked around deals with all across the state, and there's all these other folks up here that have kicked around deals all across the state. There is a lot of money sitting in this room right now, and there's money all over this state that is always looking for good deals. And if it's a good deal and it makes money, we'll absolutely be able to find investment to put in it. Not that we're going to take a fee on it or anything like that, to just help you guys transact the deal and try to put folks together, because it's, I mean, there's folks sitting in this room that are looking for good deals right now.
Another question?
No, you just, you want to talk
I am not in real estate, I know nothing about that, and I'm going to ask you a question that got me thinking as I'm listening. So, I know that you guys are saying that this is meant to make people money, but it's also meant to rejuvenate our communities. So say we have Main Street, Kansas, USA. I've got 6 different buildings on Main Street. 3 of them are occupied, 3 of them are decrepit. They need to be renovated. So we hear about these opportunity zones, we're in it, now all I really need to do is possibly buy another building. So they use the capital gains from their businesses and create their own funds. And then they decide to use the funds to buy the buildings next to them, renovate it, and then they move their business over there so they can sell the other building so somebody else can renovate it. So now the community is kind of working together where it's not making a lot of money, but it might be benefiting them if they move just next door or 3 buildings down, just so that they can do a renovation project and get these benefits. Does that make sense, or am I way off?
I think I could make that work for the real estate deal, the active real estate deal of renovating renovating a building. You know, given the numbers and things, I could probably make that work. I haven't given the business any benefit in that process, right? It was already sitting in the zone and it just moved over, but you could have an OpCo-PropCo strategy. The PropCo is the building, right? The OpCo is the operating business. I could probably make it work for PropCo in some form or fashion. So,
Like they could rent the building back to themselves.
yeah, there's something there of a way that we could use this to rejuvenate your buildings on your main street in some form or fashion.
So I've got kind of an administrative question, just to make sure that I understand this. In order to get the full benefit of the OZ, you need to make like investments as soon as possible, otherwise
2019.
each year ticks off and you start losing the benefit, correct?
Yeah, we run out. You will not, on January 1st, 20, you won't be able to get 7 years, right? So our biggest year is this next year coming up. And that's why we were all fomenting so much for guidance, because all of us were doing deals out there, but you know, they were deals with no legal opinions and nothing to it. And now we're now we're out there and we're going to start moving. And this is going to get very active through 19. And it's still good in 20 and it's still good in 21, but the full benefit, you got to be 19.
And be willing to hold it for 10 years to get the maximum. That's the big issue.
Going back to your Main Street deal, if these store owners are selling their buildings to each other and then reinvesting it, they need to be careful.
Well, that's what I'm asking, and it'd be like empty buildings, because there's empty buildings, and probably the same real estate agent probably finds those buildings because they've been there for 50 years or so, and nobody's done anything with it. So they may be buying differently, but they renovate, and then they move their business over, so they can sell this one.
If they're getting the capital gains by selling it to they generate their own personal capital gain by selling it to the fund, and then they own the fund, So they can't do that.
No, they're using their capital gains from their current business to start their shop.
I think what you're saying is, I have a building, I'm gonna sell to you. You're gonna sell yours to him, he's gonna sell him to me, and we're gonna play a little cone game. And I'm not sure that was either.
You wouldn't get an opinion from me that would. I'll tell you that.
I'm just saying, I mean, I know it's not gonna make them money, but it might give them some benefit if they do that to be able to, you know, revitalize downtown.
Why wouldn't they just borrow money? If the buildings have got that much equity in it, that they can sell it to themselves, get the money, reinvest it, and move their business, you know, one building over, why don't they just go bank and borrow money?
But aren't they getting more for using the opportunity fund?
What they're getting is a deferral of the tax that they created by selling it to themselves. I mean,
You're still paying the tax.
that doesn't make economic sense in addition
That's
to
why I was
being.
asking. No idea. Let me know.
Okay, thank you very much, panel. On the back of our agenda, there are contact names and contact information, so if you have additional questions, you can reach out to them.
One more question. If we do call you, how many 3 hours do we get? Asking for a friend.
The first 6 minutes are free. Thank you all. I will say one other final thing, and thank you all for hosting this. Thanks to the Department of Commerce for hosting this. I'll say one of the biggest components that, and you may have gotten that a lot of us up here are just talking about business and making money and otherwise, and that is what it's the heart of this program. But from the community aspect, one thing that does need to happen is we do need to be deploying this and doing good community projects, because I tell you, the biggest problem for this program isn't sort of the structuring and the rules. The biggest problem is, and it is absolutely coming, there will be fraud and abuse, or there won't be fraud and abuse, and it's not a loophole at all. We're gonna build a Four Seasons, or we're gonna build a Ritz-Carlton with this program, right? And that's gonna be on the front page of the New York Times, and the world's gonna lose its mind over the whole thing. And part of the big thing that we need is enough great projects that are happening in communities all across Kansas and all across the states that are able to provide the political heft and depth to keep support for this program. So that's why I think forums like this are so important, and why we really are probably willing to give a lot more than the free first 6 minutes in this to help good projects happen, because we're going to need that to make sure this program's there for the long time. So thank you all, appreciate it.